So if you're reading a law and it kind of triggers this, I can't do that, then it's not something you should do anyway. It's not going to fit your way of doing it. You have a certain style, a certain belief system, certain values. I'm not telling you to go outside your values, but look at that law, which is probably the ugliest in the whole book. Crush your enemy totally and understand that in the business world, that law prevails 95% of the time. You'd have to go back to my early childhood. Maybe, I felt as a child a little bit helpless around my parents in some ways. I was a very sensitive boy. I still have that issue. They were great parents, but they weren't the most overtly affectionate. And so, I was always kind of wondering and observing them and trying to be careful around them. I didn't do anything to upset them. So, I became kind of an observer of people. And my main thing was as sort of a protective device to not be hurt and to be able to have a degree of control over the people around me. So I didn't feel like I was, going to get yelled at or something like that. And then as I entered the work world, it was sort of a rude awakening for me because I had studied literature and languages. My major was ancient Greek and, things that are completely impractical in this world. And then I enter the work world with all of my dreams, my illusions, my fancies. And it's like slapped in the face. This is not what I expected. I had many different jobs. Lived in New York. I did journalism. Then I lived in Europe. I traveled around because I couldn't really find out what I wanted to do. I worked in a hotel in Paris. I taught English in Barcelona. I did construction work in Greece on an island in Greece. I worked in a television company in London. You name it, I did it. And I had all kinds of bosses. How they operate, seeing what's really going on behind their minds, because people wear masks. They don't tell you what they're thinking. They don't want to admit that they want power, that they want to control you or manipulate you in some way. And so I was always kind of a decipher of people and what their real thoughts were. And to me, figuring people out is a form of power. And then I worked in Hollywood, which is kind of the ultimate power environment because nobody in Hollywood wants to admit that. Their goal is power. They want to make it, we're about art. We're about creativity, liberal causes, blah, blah, blah. But really, they wanted power. It's the most power-hungry environment I had ever witnessed. I observed a kind of a double-faced thing quality going on. On the one hand, they would present this front to music, their employees to everyone else, but really they were practicing all of these games, these kind of power games going on, and so that's what sort of inspired my first book, The 48 Laws of Power, because my sympathies are more on the side of the underdog. I don't have a sympathy for a Hollywood executive, for a Michael Oids, for a CEO of a company. I have sympathy for the poor guy like myself who is thrown into these environments, doesn't understand them, is a bit naive, doesn't know the rules of power that these generally white men, at least back in that era, seem to know instinctively. And so I wanted to reveal to everyone what goes on behind closed doors, the real games of power that people play. So it's not that I'm obsessed with it, but I feel like people like myself are often too naive. They don't understand what they're about to get into. They don't understand how rough and brutal the world can be. And I actually wanted to kind of help them and reveal the kinds of things that I learned the hard way. Well, people have this misconception of power. They think it has to do with, CEOs and presidents, and it's kind of ugly and dirty. I have a much different conception of it. Something that has to do with your daily life. Now, I have the idea that much in our lives we cannot control. You can throw a number out. 95% you can't control disease. You can't control the people that you meet. It's by chance that you met your wife and you fell in love and you ended up marrying her. You kind of fall into jobs. There's much in life that is way beyond your control. But there's a margin that you can control, right? And it's mostly about your relationships. It has to do with your children, your spouse, your partners, your colleagues at work, your bosses, and the feeling that you have no control over them, that they can do whatever they want, that you have an idea and you want to sell it to them, music, or you want somebody to stop their annoying behavior and you can't control them. They're completely oblivious. They won't listen to anything you music say is to me the worst feeling for a human being to have. Weary animals that need that sense of I can influence my music environment. I can influence the people around me. And the sense of helplessness is a very, very primal music feeling. It's like when you take an animal, I don't know if you have dogs or cats, and you put them on their belly, music, they feel exposed. They feel terrified. And that's when they attack you. Well, that position is like being on our belly. I can't control my teenage son. He's into drugs. My husband or my wife isn't listening to me. My boss is doing. You want the ability to be able to at least defend yourself or to have some influence or power over them. It's a small margin because there's much you can't control, but to the degree that you can have some of that power, and you can. And then there's one other aspect, probably the most important aspect that I'm forgetting here, is power over yourself, self-mastery. Because a lot of the problems that you have in life, you can't really control yourself. You're subject to all these emotions, these moods, these things that grab you, that obsess you, that possess you. Your mind has these recurrent thoughts. You have no self-control and it drives you crazy. You have a habit you want to get rid of. You take some program, some class, and 3 months later you're back at it. What is it? So, the sense that you can control yourself to a degree and the sense that you can have some influence over people is power. And the more you have it, the greater the feeling you have, because you can avoid that helplessness that makes all of us kind of crazy. Well, that was sort of what I wrote the book about. But a lot of it comes from our culture, which I think plays very often a very negative role in our lives. It teaches us the wrong kinds of lessons. And so back in the days when it was television, now it's whatever you watch in whatever medium. All of the villains in the world were these power-hungry people and in black coats with cars with the windows kind of blacked out, and doing all sorts of evil, ugly things. Music, that's what we think of as power. It's like a cultural trope that we've all digested, this kind of Mackie of character who's out to kind of destroy people. Nobody thinks of power in a positive sense. And it's maddening. It drives me crazy. It's incredibly hypocritical when self-help books are written and they're trying to say that power or ambition, music or influence are ugly things, when the writer himself or herself is actually a very powerful person who has influence, who has control. It's awful. It drove me crazy. This is why I wrote. So I try and tell people, look who's one of the great saints that we hold up in our culture. Mahatma Gandhi, right? I certainly venerate him. He's an amazing person. And I read very deeply about Gandhi, and I wrote about him in my 3rd book, The Strategies of War. Control themselves. So they can't control themselves. How can they control anything in the business world, right? So we sense that in people. So be aware of that. You're probably talking too much in a lot of circumstances. And maybe you can control that. And so this is kind of a way of defending yourself in an environment where people will tend to see you as weak if you can't have any self-control. If you see that a law that's ugly, that makes you skin crawl, you don't want to do it. Have no problem with that. There are a lot of laws I don't practice in there. But you need to be aware of them. You need to be aware that other people are practicing them so that you don't become their victim. Then there are other laws that yes, you should practice, right? Like appealing to people's self-interest when you're trying to influence them, or despise the free lunch, where you learn to pay for things and be generous with your time and your money for people. So it depends on the law. But I hate it when people say, oh, what an evil book. Those are people who haven't read it, because half the laws, or more than half, have nothing evil about them, and the other half are about opening your eyes. I never say you have to practice this. I'm just making you aware of reality of what goes on in the world. Unfortunately, in the world today, and I've had this experience and we read about in the news, a lot of people who have a dark side, whom we might consider rather immoral in their behavior, get pretty damn far, right? And they use these laws and they don't pay any consequences. So, there's no kind of ultimate justice in this world. Although there might be in a religious sense, I don't deny that at all. But in a secular world, there's no consequences to pay for it. So people, if they have a lot, if they do crush your enemy totally and that's their goal, they might end up being even better at it than somebody who doesn't really want to go there, but then kind.